In 1997, 16-year-old Lee Stace was working at a supermarket in Yamba. On the 2nd of September, she clocked off for the day and was never seen alive again.
Campers found the remains near the coastal village of Brooms Head yesterday.
Someone's keeping a shocking secret.
And I remember saying to my dad, a lot of these people are lying.
I want to help cut through the lies.
Police today announced a $1 million reward for help to catch her killer.
This is a live police investigation. With your help, we can bring Lee's killer to justice.
If you're staying silent, you're protecting that person who is a murderer of a teenage girl.
Detective Superintendent Deborah Wallace rose to the top of the New South Wales Police Force with grace, humour and an iconic sense of style.
The person that was shot is known to police.
In her incredible 37 years in the force, Wallace took on murderers, drug suppliers and bikie gangs.
All cases can be solved. They're never cold. And you never give up. I'm driving through the beautiful Urega National Park in the Clarence Valley in far northern New South Wales. I'm on my way to the coastal town of Brooms Head, located within the park. It's a bit over 20 kilometres from the Pacific Highway, and there's only one road in. Brooms Head got its name literally from a broom, which washed ashore from a shipwreck in 1870. It has a population of just a few hundred people. But in the summer holidays, the caravan park and campsites fill quickly, swelling the town to capacity. I'm here to see Peter and Robin Stace, who first came to Brooms Head for a holiday with their two daughters, Lee and Kylie, way back in the 1980s. The family loved it so much, they moved here. You were saying you grew up in the Hunter Valley. That's where you originally were from?
Yes, from Maitland.
And how old was Lee when you moved to Brooms Head?
12 and a half.
Yeah.
Because she started year 7 at Maclean High School.
Yeah. And her eldest daughter, Kylie, she was in year 9, so she had 4 years to go, so we thought it was the right time to make the move. I can remember when we had a family discussion about moving up there. The kids, the two girls, Kylie and Lee, they said, yeah, great. Lee said, oh, that'll be good. I said to her, I said, hey, you know you still got to go to school. And she said, oh, do we? Because we always went there on holidays, and she thought it was just going to be one big holiday.
Did she like school?
No, she hated school.
Did she? Lee left Maclean High at the end of year 10 and enrolled at TAFE. But she didn't like that either. She lived for a time with her older sister Kylie, who'd moved out of the family home. 16-year-old Lee moved back in with Mum and Dad in August 1997. Around the same time, she got her first job at a supermarket in Yamba. She got a job at Bilo?
Yep, at Yamba, yep.
How long did she work there for?
Not quite 2 weeks.
Okay.
She never ever received a first pay.
Right.
Yep.
Lee never got her wages because someone murdered her before her first payday.
And we're here today to hopefully tell our story about the plight of our daughter. And hopefully someone out there that has information will decide to come forward. And that's what this is all about, bringing it back into light and getting someone to come forward.
This is a photo of Lee with her best friend Terry in the 90s. They met in Brooms Head when they were little kids.
I was 5, she was 7. Our parents were at the bowls club actually, and we bumped into each other and she knocked me over and she pulled me up, and that's how we met.
And so the lifelong friendship was formed?
Yes.
When the Staces first moved to Brooms Head, they lived in Honeysuckle Street, just a few doors away from Terry and her family.
Peter and Robin, they were like second parents to me. If I wasn't at Lee's place, Lee was at my place.
So inseparable, almost.
We were inseparable, yes. Yes, always with each other. And she called my mum and dad, and I called her mum, dad. We were very close.
Let's go back to September 1997. There was a sort of routine that you girls had. Could you take me through that day?
We always caught the bus from Brooms Head to Maclean High School, but that morning, unfortunately, Lee had a hiccup, which made us late for the school bus. We did run after it in bare feet, but we missed it, so my father had to run us to school that day.
Terry was 13 and still at school. So as she walked through the gates at Maclean High, Lee had to figure out how she was going to get to work in Yamba, a further 16 kilometres away on the coast. In the end, Lee hitched 2 rides from passing motorists. Lee arrived into Yamba in time to clock on for her shift at Bilo at 10 a.m. Hi Tamara, I'm calling from the car park outside Coles in Yamba, which I believe used to be a Bilo supermarket. Is that right?
Yes, it was.
I'm talking to Tamara. She'd been friends with Lee since they were 12. And for a brief time in 1997, they worked together at Bilo in Yamba.
I was working as a checkout chick.
And so was Lee. Tamara, what were you doing in Yamba that day?
On that day, I remember it was very busy. A lot of people around. I remember that Lee and I had made a couple of laughs together because she kept complaining about her feet.
The two friends were making plans to take a holiday on the Gold Coast.
We actually talked about going up to Dreamworld. There was going to be a few of us that were going to go to Dreamworld. We're all pretty excited about that.
Lee started her shift before Tamara, which also meant that Lee finished her shift before Tamara. But the plan was that Lee would wait for Tamara to finish so they could get the bus home together.
Before she left, she'd spoken to me and she'd said that, could she please have a smoke off me? And I said, when I get off work, I'll give her one. And then she just said, I'll go and wait out the front. And I said, all right, I'll be there soon, because I was going to be there soon. I sort of turned and I could see her walking away down the end of the mall towards the exit doors, towards where the bus stop was. And then that was the last time I'd seen her.
15 minutes later, Tamara finished her shift. But within those 15 minutes, Lee had disappeared.
I go to give her the smoke, but she's not there. And I walk around, all around there.
Tamara looked in all the shops, but couldn't find Lee anywhere.
I thought, oh man, she's going to miss the bus. That's what I was thinking. Back then, if you missed the bus, you'd have to either call someone to come pick you up, or a lot of us just hitchhiked. It was quite common for us to hitchhike.
With the bus about to leave, Tamara knew if she waited any longer for Lee, she would have to hitchhike home. so she decided to hop on the bus.
But I still thought it was strange, even all the way home, and I kept thinking about it.
The girls would usually get off the bus at Maclean, and then Lee would ride back to Brooms Head on the school bus with Terry once she had finished her day at Maclean High.
However, that day she wasn't on the school bus.
Was that a surprise to you?
It was, but that afternoon I got off at my auntie's place because I had a game of netball to play with my cousin. So I really didn't take much notice of it.
What time would you have expected her home that day?
4 o'clock.
4 o'clock,
Yeah. I got home from work that afternoon about 6:30. Lee wasn't home, and I said, well, where is she? Robin said, I don't know, and she wasn't on the bus.
She's not home, you're starting to get worried.
It wasn't in Lee's nature. She was scared of the dark, and I knew that there was something wrong. Father's intuition.
Peter and Robin hit the phones. They rang Terry's place, but Terry was staying overnight at her aunt's. They rang their eldest daughter, Kylie, thinking Lee might be there, but she wasn't. And knowing that your daughter, this was totally out of character for her?
Totally out of character.
Yeah, which is why you were so worried.
And then we rang the police to report.
The police told Lee's parents they would come to Brooms Head the next day, which they did. And that's when the search for Lee began in earnest. Word of Lee's disappearance got around town fast. But nobody told Terry, who'd gone straight to school from her aunt's place where she'd stayed overnight. In the afternoon when school finished, Terry got back on the bus to go to Brooms Head.
I got on the bus expecting to see her sitting in our seat. I didn't really take much notice of it at that point. But then we got to Golmerad Primary School, which is 10 minutes max out the road, and there was a swarm of men in suits that ripped me off the bus and asked me if I'd seen her. And I said no. And at that point, I did start to panic. I was like, what's going on? And they said, she's missing. They were detectives. They were looking to see if I knew where she was. I knew instantly that something bad had happened. I felt it in my stomach.
On Wednesday, the 3rd of September 1997, 13-year-old Terry Blackwell was catching the school bus home from Maclean to Brooms Head. Police stopped the bus to tell her that her best friend, 16-year-old Lee Stace, was missing. Over the next few days, police pressed Terry for information because she and Lee were so close.
And Lee had 2 working parents. You know, she was at that age where her parents didn't really know much. She didn't tell them much. I was the one that got told everything,
So you would have known more about her lifestyle than probably, or thoughts and dreams and ambition than anybody.
Yes, it was me. I was the one that knew her as a whole person.
A lot of people at the time, including the police, believed Lee may have run away. But Terry knew that didn't happen.
She just doesn't disappear. That just wasn't Lee's persona.
Lee's workmate Tamara believed the police underestimated the seriousness of the situation.
The police didn't speak to me for a while, to be honest. I think they just thought a teen runaway or something like that. I knew that she was going to go back home because she'd said, I'm going home.
Local media got involved when a mannequin dressed as Lee was propped up at the bus stop in Yamba, where she was last seen.
My name is Deborah Novak, and up until 5 years ago, I was employed by a local regional newspaper.
What were you doing there? What was your role?
So my role was press photographer. I used to also write stories as well.
But keeping Lee Stace on the front page of the local paper was challenging.
It was a pretty extraordinary time because it was when Princess Diana died.
French police rushed to the accident in central Paris just after midnight. Diana, the fairy tale princess, tragically dead.
Her story kept drowning out Lee's story. And even though Lee may have been our princess for the Clarence Valley, you know, in her own little town, it's very hard to compete with someone like Princess Diana when it comes to the media cycle.
Days turned into weeks, and Lee's parents, Peter and Robin, grew more desperate with every passing hour.
I made posters. I drove around different towns, Byron Bay, Lismore, putting posters up. I went to different shops, police asking if they, found this missing girl.
Yeah.
I done everything I could.
I sat on the front veranda waiting for her to come home.
Robin was always of the belief that Lee was going to come home. And I just didn't think she was.
Six weeks after Lee vanished, Peter's worst fears were realised.
Campers found the remains near the coastal village of Brooms Head yesterday. Police later sealed off the area and mounted a large-scale search.
A number of personal items have been located, which are leading police to believe that maybe the remains of the missing person, Ellen Stace.
Robin was always hoped for the best. I've had my fears, but always hoped they wouldn't come true. But they did.
Terry was given the devastating news at the family home in Honeysuckle Street.
My parents met me on top of the steps, which was unusual for them. And I just looked at my mum and I could tell by this look on her face that something was wrong. And I said, "They found her, didn't they?" And she said, "Yes, they have, darling." And I said, "And she's dead?" And Mum said, "Yes." Yep. It was just overwhelming. I just ran, and I ran, and I ran, and I ran. Oh, sorry.
Don't worry, it's normal, okay? Lee's remains had been found in a shallow grave near Redcliffe Beach, less than 4 kilometres from Brooms Head, and only accessible via a dirt track. Lee was probably murdered on the day she went missing, then buried by her killer or killers under a bush canopy. She was naked, leading police to believe she'd been sexually assaulted. A blood-stained piece of rough sawn timber found nearby was identified as the probable murder weapon. You were also taken to the area that they found Lee's remains.
That's correct. I was taken up there to see if the area was familiar to me, because Lee and I spent a lot of time up there. That particular spot where she was not far from where we often did picnic.
That must have been very traumatic for you.
That was extremely traumatic for me.
What were you feeling then?
Everything was running through my mind. about how she was feeling and how afraid she would have been. And she'd have fought back with everything she had. Everything, 100%.
And I remember the detective at the time. He took me up there to show me this place. And I remember kneeling down. I said a prayer. And I made a promise that I'll never let this case rest while I'm alive.
Police and volunteers are searching bushland near Yamba after the discovery of human remains. Personal belongings found at the scene are believed to be those of missing 16-year-old Lee Ellen Stace.
Lee's remains were discovered at Redcliffe, between the beach and the campground. She'd been murdered just a few kilometres from her home in Brooms Head. Journalist Charles Miranda was sent to cover the story for the Daily Telegraph.
I remember turning up to the crime scene. We got up there before dawn, sat in the car park, and then all of a sudden, it was like a circus. There must have been over 100. You had SES, you had the Rural Fire Brigade, you had people turning up with rakes. And it's like, who are you? Oh, we're just people, live nearby.
Yeah.
The whole area should have been locked down as a crime scene. People wanted to solve this case. Of biggest concern to them was the fact that it was one of their own that potentially did this. Half the local population wanted to believe it was a blow-in, it was someone going up and down the Pacific Highway, Ivan Milat style, but those, I guess, more connected with the community thought, no, this is local.
One of the first steps in the police investigation was to revisit the last verified sighting of Lee outside the supermarket in Yamba. I'm meeting Deb Novak there to ask how she thought Lee might have travelled from Yamba to Redcliffe.
How do you get there? Is there only one way to get there?
Okay, so there are two ways to get there, and one way is the back way and one way is through Maclean.
What do you think would be the most likely route she'd go?
My gut instinct would be Maclean.
Okay, let's hit the road.
As we drive to Maclean, I'm interested to hear Deb's thoughts on who Lee might have hitched a ride with out of Yamba.
Is it more likely that she got into someone's car that she actually knew, or could she have got into the car of a random stranger? What do you think?
Her friends actually say that when Lee was hitchhiking, she would never ever get into a car with a stranger. She would only ever get into a car with somebody that she knew. And they were very adamant about that.
In the early days of the investigation, police were swamped with information about Lee's movements once she left Yamba.
So a lot of people rang up, I think, and there was a lot of reported sightings at the time. Do you know how many sightings were actually reported?
So I think unofficially there were 27 sightings.
That's a lot of sightings. But the reason Deb Novak is so adamant that Lee went via Maclean is that she knows of at least 6 credible sightings in Maclean on the day that Lee disappeared.
See the Ace Variety discount shop, that's where she stopped and bought a packet of cigarettes.
Right.
If Deb is correct, Lee got into 2 different cars. One took her to Maclean, and then a second car took her to Redcliffe Beach, where she was killed. But who was driving those cars? Lee's friend Tamara says there was a lot of misinformation swirling about.
I actually heard a lot of different rumours. But the thing is that a lot of it didn't even make sense. And I remember saying to my dad, a lot of these people are lying.
I now realise why it took police so long to get a handle on this case. In the first year of the investigation, police examined more than 100 persons of interest. It took 12 years for the long list of suspects to be narrowed down. In 2009, when a coronial inquest was finally held into the murder of Lee Stace, 3 key suspects were publicly named. The first one was Gregory John Davis.
Yes.
Can you tell me what you know of him?
Yes, so he was known as Dowie in our local town.
In 1997, Greg Davis also lived in Brooms Head. In fact, he lived on the corner of Baronia and Honeysuckle Street, right near Terry and Lee.
And he lived 2 doors down from me on the corner opposite Lee's house. Dowie had 2 girls, one who went to school with us as she was in my grade, and one older.
Lee's remains were found at Redcliffe on October 17, 1997. Greg Davis inserted himself into the police investigation at the crime scene just a few days later.
There was nothing anonymous about this guy. He wanted everyone to know that he believed he had information that was relevant to this case.
Greg Davis reported to the police and the media that he'd seen someone acting suspiciously at Redcliffe around the time that Lee disappeared. Davis gave a detailed description of the man, right down to the style of his pants.
His information was so specific and so clear in his mind. I think to some detectives on the case, they thought, well, hang on, we have a suspect, let's move the case in that way.
The information supplied by Greg Davis was discounted. But then suspicions were raised about him as a person of interest.
The police concentrated and focused a lot of their time on him, and he denied it.
The coroner noted in his report that Greg Davis often visited Redcliffe, where Lee was murdered. The coroner alluded to evidence that Davis may have had scratches on his face the weekend after Lee disappeared.
A couple of times he's approached me and he said, oh, the cops are trying to blame me for your daughter's murder and I've had nothing to do with it, I wasn't even up there and didn't have the car that day.
The coroner concluded there was insufficient evidence to charge Greg Davis, and we make no allegations against him. The coroner named 2 other suspects, Anthony Charles Apps and John George O'Leary. They're both known sex offenders, and they both accused each other of the murder of Lee Stace.
Do one of those 2 men particularly have information that could help police? Absolutely. Are they willing to share it? Absolutely not.
Lee hitchhiked home along this road a couple of times in the weeks leading up to her murder. Police have identified 3 main suspects, a former neighbour of the Stace family and 2 known child sex offenders who lived locally. One of them is a convicted killer. 33-year-old Anthony Apps.
Apps was a strange character. He was, just prior to Lee's disappearance, a local in Brooms Head. He lived directly across the road from my house. He wasn't that old. He was in his early 20s, from memory. Bright curly red hair. He'd pass us saying hello one day and then threatened to kill you the next.
So, very strange.
Extremely strange person.
There was a very strong connection between Apps and Lee.
And what were those connections?
It was a family connection.
Lee was friends with his girlfriend's daughter.
There was a stage where he was actually accused of sexually molesting his stepdaughter.
Anthony Apps was formally interviewed by police 8 days after Lee Stace's remains were discovered. He denied any involvement in her murder, but struggled to account for his movements on the day she disappeared. So where to next?
So we're off to Jubilee Street.
When I caught up with Deb Novak, she took me to a residential street in Maclean, where a witness reported some very unusual behaviour on the day of Lee's disappearance. So Deb, here we are in Jubilee Street. What thing of significance happened here?
Okay, one of the witnesses saw Lee Ellen being dragged into a car by one of the prime suspects, being Anthony Apps.
Two days after he was first formally interviewed by police, Anthony Apps injured himself trying to break into a museum in Maclean. There was some suggestion at the time that he may have injured himself on purpose. Apps also had an unusual reaction to a TV news report on Lee's murder inquiry in 2000. On the night of the broadcast, he stole a vehicle from a prawn farm where he was working near Yamba and went on a crime spree. Apps was arrested, charged and jailed over these offences. But in 2003, when he was released back into the community, he killed a man. Apps was arrested and charged for shooting 42-year-old Christopher Lamb in the head at this farmhouse near Maclean. Apps was sentenced to 27 years in jail. I've learned that he was recently paroled. Apps continues to deny any involvement in Lee Stace's murder. Instead, he's accused an associate, John George O'Leary, of killing 16-year-old Lee.
I never met O'Leary. I'd never even heard of the man until he was mentioned to me by detectives. However, since then, I have painted a picture of him myself, yes.
And what does that picture look like?
He's an animal.
In 1994, 3 years before Lee was murdered, O'Leary committed a heinous crime against 3 schoolgirls from Maclean High. O'Leary lured the girls aged 13 and 14 into his car by offering food, alcohol and cannabis. He took them to a beach where he tied them up and raped them.
O'Leary, he was friends with Apps.
So this is the pump station?
Yes, that's correct. This is the pump station where Lee was apparently seen.
When I was out driving with Deb Novak, she took me to the Palmer's Island pump station on the road between Yamba and Maclean. A member of the public reported seeing Lee here on the day she disappeared. A hair clip, later identified as possibly belonging to Lee, was also found at the pump station.
But there's one other thing significant about this location.
Yes, the two persons of interest, Anthony Apps and John O'Leary, work at the prawn farm just up the road here. And they would have had the opportunity to drive past Lee if she was there, heading back to their place of residence.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
O'Leary was unable to confirm an alibi for September 2, 1997, the day Lee disappeared. He was still on bail for the rape charges, and his bail conditions required him to sign in at Sydney's Mount Druitt police station 3 times a week. There is no record of O'Leary signing in on September 3, the day after Lee's disappearance.
So that put him in the frame, maybe an accomplice, certainly a suspect.
Did Apps involve O'Leary in a joint enterprise to kill Lee? Police began to focus their inquiries on this theory. Lee was a casual user of cannabis. Apps was a known user, and so was O'Leary.
And it could have been related to drugs. You know, did she find something out? Did she threaten to go to police with information she had? It could have been something as remote as a throwaway remark she made and someone said, well, I need to shut this down. So there are a lot of theories that she had inside knowledge which someone didn't want to get out.
When O'Leary was behind bars serving time for the schoolgirl rapes, he spoke to a prison informer about Lee's murder. He said this to the informer: "Mate, I was with Apps. We went to Brooms Head from Maclean. Apps was the one that done the final straw on her." That quote was presented to the coroner's court by a police officer in 2009. So, O'Leary accused Apps of landing the final blows that killed Lee Stace. However, we understand Anthony Apps spoke to another prison informer and accused O'Leary of killing Lee. Neither man has been charged with Lee's murder, and we make no allegations against either of them. I've had a good look at the circumstances surrounding the 1997 murder of 16-year-old Lee Stace in northern New South Wales. But now, it's time to review the facts and the key suspects with former New South Wales detective Wayne Hayes. Is there anything that particularly strikes you about this case?
Yeah, there's quite a few things. The first is that, in my view, it's probably started as an opportunistic sexual assault.
It's hard to prove a definitive case of sexual assault because Lee's remains were found in an advanced state of decomposition 6 weeks after her murder.
But the fact that she's naked and the clothing's left there, basically, is indicative of a sexual assault. The nature of the crime scene itself, with a piece of wood used to probably kill her, the fact that it's a shallow grave, the fact that it is so close to a home, etc., indicates to me that it's an unplanned or disorganised offender.
It has all the bearings of somebody she knew, somebody that was very local to her.
I agree with Wayne, so I want to hear his thoughts on the 3 persons of interest identified in the coroner's report. Starting with Greg Davis, who lived near the Staces in Brooms Head.
He had local knowledge of the area because obviously he's just very close to the area. And he may have also had scratches on his face shortly after she was disappeared. And that's never been properly explained.
The next person of interest is Anthony Apps.
His antecedents of being a local, knowing the victim, a history of violence, it all goes in there into the package that makes him a very worthwhile person of interest.
Apps has not been able to provide a watertight alibi accounting for his movements on the day Lee disappeared. Neither has his friend John O'Leary. On the day after Lee went missing, O'Leary failed to satisfy his bail conditions by not signing in at a Sydney police station.
And there's information received that he in fact had access to a motor vehicle.
Right.
So he could have actually travelled up there.
O'Leary was on bail for raping 3 girls from Maclean High School.
There's some similarities to this crime insofar as they were youngish girls. They were picked up by O'Leary, coerced with alcohol and drugs. That similarity in some ways to the offence, as an investigator, I would take a lot of notice of.
What do you understand of the relationship between Apps and O'Leary?
They originally denied knowing each other, but as the inquiry progressed, it became very clear that certainly associates from working at a prawn farm together, some drinking, socialising together, I'd raise it to a fairly high level of association, yep.
Police don't believe they have enough evidence to charge Apps or O'Leary, but that's not to say they're the only persons of interest.
The family of a teenager murdered on the state's north coast more than 20 years ago hopes the case will finally be solved. The body of 16-year-old Lee Ellen Stace was found in a national park near Brooms Head in 1997. Police today announced a $1 million reward for help to catch her killer.
What does your team do to breathe life into a case like this?
We review it and we assess all the information. We go back to the original investigation.
Detective Superintendent Danny Doherty leads the New South Wales Police Homicide Squad. He wants everyone watching to know there's $1 million sitting on the table right now to help solve this case. As part of the reinvestigation, police are re-examining all the physical evidence gathered in 1997, with a particular focus on the crime scene. What was located at this crime scene that you think may be able to help your investigation?
There's another items that belong to Lee. It's been identified by the family. There was also a piece of timber that was located that had blood and other matter on it. We'll be re-examining that item, and that's with the hope of trying to find a profile.
While we were working on this show, another potential suspect came to our attention. He was a person of interest early in the police investigation. This information has been passed on to New South Wales Police. It is our hope that more people will come forward if they have any information about Lee's murder. would you like to say to anyone watching this show?
Just come forward. It's not too big and it's not too small. It could be that tiny piece that we need to get some peace. Lee deserves peace. And all of those that are left behind, we deserve it too.
I really would like justice to be done and the murderer be found. If you're staying silent, you're protecting that person. You're protecting that person who is a murderer of a teenage girl. Someone's daughter, someone's niece, someone's friend. It still hurts. It still breaks hearts. Because we all miss her.
It's been a long road for everyone. Robin and Peter are regular visitors to Redcliffe Beach, where they've established a memorial to Lee behind the dunes.
Good morning, Lee.
Oh, it's not too bad.
Saw a few weeds here.
Well, it means, you know, a terrible lot to us because this is where our daughter was murdered and it's where she was buried.
Yeah, this is where she is, not in the cemetery in town.
Yeah.
There's that relic that Julia got off the beach.
I made a promise to my daughter that I'd maintain this place as long as I'm alive, in her memory. So, yeah, that's what we do, don't we, dear?
Yep.
And we'll just keep looking after this place as long as we can.
Lee's murder has had a massive impact on the Stace family. Lee's older sister, Kylie, made a life-changing decision not to have children.
After seeing what Mum and Dad went through, and herself, she said, no, I just can't do it. I can't have kids. So,
And she's still firm to that even today?
Yeah.
and you've got to respect that, you know, as much as it hurts.
There have been so many lives devastated by the murder of Lee Stace. If you know something that might help bring her killer to justice, please share it with police.
And a lot of people are praying for a positive outcome, you know, and hopefully this might jerk someone's conscience to do the right thing.
Bye-bye, Lily.
See you next time, mate. Love you.